Is a 100-inch TV better than a 100-inch projector screen? On paper, absolutely. But stick around to see why you might still want to get a projector instead. In this video, I've got the current best Ultra Short Throw Projector and Lifestyle Projectors, the Hisense PX3-Pro and Valerion Pro 2, and I'm going to put them head-to-head up against this 100-inch Hisense U76N QLED TV to see which one is the best fit for your space. And I can almost guarantee the results will surprise you because they were nothing like I was expecting. Starting with the price, TVs seem to be the only thing in this economy getting cheaper, and the Hisense U76N is no exception. For $18.99, you get a full 100-inch 4K QLED TV with full array local dimming, 4K 144Hz input, and support for all the latest video formats and features. And I know that is not exactly cheap, but for a 100-inch screen, that is a heck of a deal. Especially compared to the best lifestyle projector on the market, the Valerion Pro 2, which was recently on Kickstarter for $2,099, but if you didn't get in on that, it will cost you $2,999. The Valerion also works best with an ALR screen, and for this video I'm going to be pairing it with the Valerion Long Throw Fresnel ALR screen that costs $849, and that makes the total package $3,850, which is over twice the price of the TV. And the best ultra short throw / laser TV on the market, the Hisense PX3-Pro, sells for $3,500, and it also needs a screen. So for this video, I'll be using the Nexgo 100-inch Fresnel ALR screen, which is another $800, for a grand total of $4,300, making it by far the most expensive option. But surely those big projector price tags come with better performance, right? Well, I ran through all of my standard tests using CalMan Ultimate, starting with my brightness and contrast patterns for each display's most color accurate mode, and the Valerion Pro 2 had the lowest peak brightness at 239.4 nits with a black floor of 0.023 nits, with EBL on high, giving it a dynamic contrast of 10,499 to 1, which is pretty good. The Hisense PX3-Pro had a peak brightness of 334 nits with a black floor of 0.03 nits for a dynamic contrast of 11,257 to 1, which is also very good. But using my standard test pattern, which lights up the entire screen, the U76N was still the brightest, putting out a respectable 382 nits, and thanks to its full array local dimming, it had a basically infinite contrast ratio. But the most impressive part about local dimming is that normal content rarely shows an entire full white screen. So for smaller areas and highlights, it can dump extra power into those specific backlights, and using a smaller 25% test window, the U76N put out 767.7 nits in its most color accurate mode, giving it over twice the peak brightness of the PX3-Pro, even on a high gain Fresnel ALR screen. While I was at it, I also measured their out-of-the-box color accuracy, and on SDR theater mode, the Valerion Pro 2 was the least accurate with an average color error of 4 and a max of 10.9. The U76N was in second with an average error of 3.8 and a max of 6.44, and the Hisense PX3-Pro came in as the most color accurate with an average error of 3.28 and a maximum of 6.22, but all of those results are actually pretty good. However, there is one area that triple laser projectors absolutely dominate, and that's in color gamut coverage, and the Valerion came out on top with 96.51% coverage of the largest BT2020 HDR color space. The PX3-Pro came in second with 93.7%, and in a distant third, the U76N's QLED LCD panel covered just 75.64% of BT2020. But we'll have to see if that actually hurts its overall viewing experience, since most HDR content is mastered in the smaller DCI-P3 color space, of which the U76N still covered 95%. But enough numbers, let's see how they actually compare, starting with the best possible conditions. A dark room with no windows, no lights, surrounded on the sides by black curtains, which I have always thought would be the optimal conditions where a projector would easily beat a TV. Starting with the Hisense PX3-Pro on the left and the Hisense U76N on the right, one of the coolest parts about doing this comparison is that all three displays are using the same image processing chip, the Pentonic 700, so they have almost all the exact same picture options. So I can set them up identically for a full apples to apples comparison. And as we watch a little bit of content here, one thing that I do feel like I need to say is that all of these displays look ridiculously good. And if you have never seen a premium 100-inch screen, you would be absolutely blown away by all three of these. But in the 1% darkest and 1% brightest scenes, the TV absolutely dominated the projector here. And you can see that in Wicked using Dolby Vision, the clouds in the super bright sky at the end of The Wizard and I are definitely blown out on the PX3 Pro, but are perfectly rendered on the U76N. And in the torturously dark staircase scene in 1917, the TV does a great job preserving detail and avoiding crushing shadows, while the local dimming zones give it an incredibly deep black level, especially when compared to the projector. However, if you exclude the 2% most difficult scenes and you focus on the other 98% of scenes that aren't pushing the display to its absolute limits, I thought that the PX3 Pro was ever so slightly better, with a little higher intra-scene contrast and better color saturation, which made the U76N look a little bit hazy in some scenes. Still, there is no denying that the overall darkroom performance of the U76N TV was better than the PX3 Pro Ultra Short Throw Projector, so next it was time to see how the standard throw Valerion Pro 2 would fare against the U76N. And this time, in the brightest scenes, I thought that the Valerion was absolutely dominant. And compared to the TV, the projector had an intensely dramatic image that really felt like stepping out into the sunlight on a bright day. But it was still somehow able to resist the clipping in the highlights and the clouds. And like the PX3 Pro, I thought that the vast majority of scenes looked slightly higher contrast on the Valerion, with better color saturation and vibrance. However, the darkest scenes were much more of a test. And even though you can see the laser dimming of the Valerion working hard, it still can't match the full array local dimming on the TV. And if you're familiar with this scene from 1917, you know that both displays are doing an amazing job here, like top 1%. But the TV is doing ever so slightly better, especially if the color of the black bars is distracting for you. However, you can see that content like Gemini Man, which doesn't have those black bars, is much closer, and you can see that the Valerion maintains better color saturation at low brightness, and you can see how it looks less washed out, especially near the end of the scene. So I'm going to call this a win for the Valerion overall, but these two were very close. And last, just for good measure, here's the PX3 Pro on the left and the Valerion Pro 2 on the right, and in bright scenes you can see that the Valerion has a much more dramatic image with extremely bright highlights, good contrast, and shadow detail, and in dark scenes the laser dimming algorithm on the Valerion is miles ahead of the PX3 Pro, which despite having over twice the native contrast, still can't come close to competing with the Valerion. And that means that overall, in a completely dark room, I think that the standard throw Valerion Pro 2 was the best, followed by the Hisense U76N, and the Hisense PX3 Pro came in third place. But what about bright conditions? Because I think that most people either don't have or don't want a completely pitch black room. So for this test, I turned on a bank of overhead LED lights that span nearly the entire room about 12 feet from the screens. And you can immediately see the problem, and that's that the color of the screen when the display is off is the darkest black that screen can ever be. Because for both a TV and a projector, you can only add more light. You can't take any light away. And you can see that even these high-performing ambient light rejecting screens look completely gray next to a TV screen. Starting the comparisons with the PX3 Pro on the left and the U76N on the right, I would describe the PX3 Pro as watchable in these conditions, but I definitely wouldn't call it good. And the TV is clearly superior even in bright scenes, and in dark scenes, the projector was just terrible, even with 3500 lumens and a top-of-the-line ambient light rejecting screen. And unfortunately, the Valerion didn't do any better. And again, in bright content, I thought it was clearly watchable, but clearly inferior to the TV, and dark content was just a complete mess in a bright room. But I also think that this is a little bit of an extreme. And while the positioning of the lights in the room happened to work out for this viewing angle, the glare and reflections on the TV were pretty significant. And that got me thinking about a friend of mine who has a very large bank of windows directly behind their seating area. And even with the blinds closed, the reflection on their TV is very visible. So to try to simulate that, I set up a small faux skylight directly behind the camera, which works by projecting light at the floor rather than at the screen, mimicking the sun coming through a window. And starting with a dark scene with the light on minimum brightness to simulate the late day sun coming through windows with the curtain drawn, you can see that the Nexigo Ultra Short Throw ALR screen does a little bit better of a job rejecting light than the Valerion Pro 2, and while the U76N clearly had the deepest black levels, it also had a big bright spot in the middle of the screen, which I found horribly distracting in dark scenes. But it was not that big of a deal in bright scenes where it was barely noticeable. But I also thought that the projectors looked pretty great in those bright scenes with just a very small amount of ambient light to contend with. However, turning up the brightness to simulate a more midday sun or maybe less effective curtains results in a distracting glare on the TV even in the brightest scenes. And the brighter light also washes out the projector screens even more, so in the end, neither of these are ideal, and a lot of it will just depend on the exact positioning of the lights and windows in your space, and whether or not you prefer a slightly washed out screen with no glare or a high contrast image with distracting reflections. But overall, I think it's fair to say that in a perfect room, a TV is 99% as good as a projector. In a bright room, a TV is clearly superior, and in a dim room, it really just depends on the placement of your windows and your lights. So since the U76N is less than half the price of the Valerion or PX3-Pro, it's gotta be the clear pick, right? Well, next it's time to talk about logistics, which is where projectors really start to shine. A 100-inch screen is 88 inches wide and about 51 inches tall. So once you decide on where you're going to want your screen, the next question is how you're going to get it there. Because a 100-inch TV is wider than a sheet of plywood, even without accounting for the box. So it isn't going to fit into any vehicle except for an open bed pickup truck. And while the Hisense U76N is actually one of the lighter TVs on the market, it still weighs 140 pounds. So if you've got stairs or tight corners to contend with, you're going to need manpower, a lot of pivoting, and a little bit of luck. And if you're planning on moving every few years, I don't know if your 100-inch TV is going to come with you. A lifestyle projector like the Valerion Pro 2, on the other hand, is designed to be portable, and while you can ceiling mount it, you can also just sit it on a table and use its optical zoom to project a 100-inch screen from anywhere between 80 and 130 inches away. And while I personally wouldn't recommend it, you can also put it to the side of your seating area and use its digital keystone to fit the image onto the screen. An ultra short throw projector like the PX3-Pro is somewhere in the middle in terms of ease of setup because it's slightly less flexible when it comes to placement, but once it's installed, the experience is much more comparable to a TV, where you don't need to worry about people walking in front of the projector and blocking the image. The other good news for projectors is that their screens come in pieces in relatively small boxes, and the easiest option is just to assemble them in the room where they're going to be mounted, but at around 25 pounds, they're also pretty easy to maneuver around, and you can even disassemble them if necessary. Projectors also have the massive benefit of being able to use drop-down and floor-rising screens. So if you don't have a wall that can fit a big screen without blocking a window, or you just don't want a giant black rectangle on your wall when you aren't watching TV, rolling screens let you have a big screen on demand. Also for this video, I used 100-inch screens for both projectors, but there's nothing stopping you from going up to 120 inches or even 150 inches with the PX3-Pro, and Valerion sells screens all the way up to 220 inches for their Vision Master series. And I know it seems like 120 inches isn't that much bigger than 100, but it's actually 44% bigger, and it's the equivalent of adding the area of an additional 65-inch TV. So if you want a screen size over 100 inches, a projector is still basically the only option. And last here is a rapid fire of a bunch of things that you might want to consider before deciding on a TV versus a projector. Starting out with cable management, a properly installed wall-mounted TV with wires running through the wall is about as clean a look as you can get, but it definitely requires some work to get the cables run through the wall properly. An ultra short throw projector, on the other hand, just sits on an entertainment console and it provides the same clean look with the wires tucked out of the way without needing to feed them through the wall. And while a standard throw projector works great when you're using the built-in apps and speakers, if you ever want to hook up your video game console, surround sound system, or even just a sound bar, things start to look a little bit more unruly and cable management becomes an issue because your projector is going to be at least 7 to 10 feet away from where the rest of your equipment probably is. So from a cable management perspective, TVs and ultra short throw projectors have a definite advantage. Next, let's talk about gaming, and when you're comparing a TV to a projector, there are actually two important factors to consider. First, you've got input lag, which is the amount of time it takes for the display to process the signal coming into it before it produces the image on the screen. And DLP projectors refresh the entire screen at the same time, so the top of the screen has the exact same input lag as the bottom. And both the PX3-Pro and Valerion Pro 2 get very close to single frame input lag, meaning 16.7 milliseconds for 60 Hz, 8.3 milliseconds for 120 Hz, and 4.2 milliseconds for 1080p 240 Hz refresh rates. In contrast, the U76N uses an LCD panel, meaning it refreshes from the top of the screen down, and at 60 Hz, the top of the screen has less than 1 frame of input lag, but at the bottom it's slightly more. And that's also the same for 120, 144, and 240 Hz, which by the way is another major advantage of the U76N, which supports 4K 120 and even 4K 144 Hz, while there are currently 0 0 DLP projectors on the market that can output 4K 120 Hz. The second thing to consider when choosing a DLP or an LCD is called pixel response time, which is how long it takes each pixel to change from one color to another. And in this case, DLP has the advantage of a basically instantaneous pixel response time, which when combined with the ping pong buffer system leads to 0 screen tearing and nearly 0 motion blur even in the most fast-paced games. So for console gaming, I would give a slight edge to DLP projectors, but if you've got a monster gaming PC that can handle 4K 120 or 144 Hz output, the TV is definitely going to be better. DLP projection is also the last remaining way to consume 3D content outside of a VR headset using active DLP-linked glasses. So if 3D movies are something that interests you, and yes, they are still releasing them, then a projector is pretty much the only option. For some people though, DLP projection has some major drawbacks. Starting with sensitivity to the rainbow effect, which is when high contrast areas look like they have a rainbow border, which is caused by DLP's sequential projection of each color, but an LCD TV has no such effect. Also, both the PX3-Pro and Valerion Pro 2 are triple laser projectors, which can have noticeable laser speckle based on the screen material you choose. And again, certain people seem to be more sensitive to the glittering effect of laser speckle than others. So in conclusion, after close to 30 hours of side-by-side viewing of these 3 screens, what's my final recommendation? If you have space on your wall for exactly a 100-inch screen, you're able to get it in your house and to your room, and you don't have windows directly behind your viewing area, you should get the TV. At less than half the cost of a comparable projector setup, the image quality is unbelievably good. And some way, somehow, I'm gonna get this thing up the stairs and into my bedroom to replace my current 100-inch fixed frame projector setup. But if you want a roll down screen, a floor rising screen, or a screen over 100 inches, I think that the side-by-side comparisons show that there isn't that big of a difference between the picture quality of a projector and a TV, given the right lighting conditions. And there are so many things that a projector can do and places that a projector can go that a 100-inch TV just can't. But that flexibility does come with a cost, and you're gonna pay significantly more for a projector to get the same or even slightly less performance than you'd get with a TV. And if you still can't decide, I've got recent reviews of the best ultra short throw projectors, all the best lifestyle projectors, and 19 of the most popular projector screens on the market. And as always, there are no sponsored reviews on this channel. I do have links down in the description for all 3 of the displays in this video, and as always, I appreciate when you use those links since as an Amazon affiliate, I do earn a small commission on the sale at no cost to you. I'd also like to thank all of my awesome patrons over at Patreon for supporting my channel and making it possible for me to do these unsponsored reviews. And if you're interested in supporting my channel, please check out the links down in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and as always, thanks for watching The Hookup.